I'm out of weed, so let me take a toke on my vape pen instead. And here we go. Hello and welcome to the Roundtable Podcast. My name is Shogun. Joining me today is my good friend Knight Anakin Cringewalker, a very intelligent and well-educated man with a background in microbiology and genetic engineering, but also very knowledgeable about other subjects and very interested in the topics he chose: genetic engineering, aliens, and Christianity. So three things I'm very interested in, the Christian Canon in particular. So before we jump into that, please make sure you've joined us on the Roundtable Discord server, where we record this podcast every day at 8 p.m. Central Time, aka right now. And on the Roundtable server, make sure you check out hashtag RT Podcast and join, subscribe, like, and follow our YouTube channel, our YouTube video channel, our BitChute channel, and check out our hundreds of amazing podcasts on every subject you can imagine. That being said, welcome, Knight Anakin Cringewalker. How are you, sir? Thank you for joining me.
Okay. It was interesting the way you mentioned my background. I academically speaking, I was raised and trained in architecture, but my undergrad is, I'm okay mentioning it, it's Rensselaer, which is a pretty old, possibly second oldest engineering school in the country to West Point. And they allow you the opportunity to take a polytechnic approach. So I chose biology with architecture, and that allowed me to get a little bit into crazy stuff, which, if all goes according to plan, I'll be starting a PhD in Europe on the topic in a few months. So that's pretty cool. Yeah. Oh, what?
I was just say very cool indeed, but I didn't mean to interrupt you.
No, okay, that's okay. So I guess we'll go down the list. So I wanted to start the topic on like aliens because it's discussed here. I put the phrase as like non-human beings just to be vague. You can call them aliens, demons, angels, whatever. That's, to me, it's kind of categorically the same thing, although some people like to differentiate. I think if you are an ancient species that's more advanced than humanity, you probably are within a range of categories that humans may call angel or demon as well. I think I'll just start a little bit like my own experience with this stuff, a little bit of the personal side. I don't like to necessarily, but I've had a few experiences. My undergrad, like I mentioned, it's one of the older schools and universities, so we have a lot of Air Force research and development. There are rooms in my university where you can just hop on in and see like footage right off of a rover on Mars or something. It's pretty crazy being that close to like direct footage. Um, and this university has deals with NASA and as well as the Air Force, and does a lot of rocketry, and a lot of times NASA directly recruits from my undergrad. I wasn't in that side. I was in the materials and architecture side of things with a leaning in biology, like I mentioned. But I saw some things, which I assume are research vessels of some sort. I definitely have seen a triangle. I was walking home from my dorm, probably my third or fourth year. I looked up and I saw 3 points in the sky, obstructing stars between them, going quietly in a very, very north-south direction, I believe. No noise. This took up. It was about maybe 5 or 6 moons in length, if you think about how big the moon is in the sky. So it's fairly huge. No sound. If it was low to the ground, there was no sound. If it was up in the sky, it must have been huge. I've also seen a odd linear craft, I think I'd say. I have photographs of this, which I should really post because I was getting into photography at the time, and I looked up at the night sky. I was taking photographs of airplanes, and I noticed this weird rotating device that looked like, kind of like a helicopter, but without the helicopter, just the blades kind of rotating around itself. And it was kind of going in a direction. It was odd, so I took some photographs. Kept the settings I was taking to take the. It was a setting to take like those lung exposures at night for planes, so you get those kind of like doodly lines. This thing was flashing so quickly, I didn't get doodly lines. I got a lot of little dots, so it was lower than the frame rate of my camera. Unlike airplanes, where the frame rate of the flashing light was high enough to make those long exposure smears. So whatever it was bleeping very quickly, but not flying very quickly. And a friend of mine who ran a dorm slash frat house um, mentioned to me once in passing that he had seen ball lightning, and ball lightning is a very common occurrence at this campus. And mind you, I've been out of that university for about 6 years now since I graduated, so this is a while ago. But ball lightning happens a remarkably lot amount of times. I've seen it a couple times in the sky above, just these little spheroids of like gashing light that just kind of like bobble around in the sky and disappear into the clouds. I've seen a fleet of ball lightning. If you want to consider that aliens, that's maybe. So just like dozens of these craft kind of twirling around through the sky and then just disappearing into a cloud. And then I also remember I skipped the account that my friend gave. So the ball lightning entered his house as a like kind of pulsating bulb that was like flashing all over the place, and then it just like discharged onto his door and like freaked him out. So there's definitely some things that I would identify as odd at this campus. And to the extent that I might even call it haunted, here's the intersect between aliens or angels, or because of where I had these experiences, I ended up considering them one and the same. My sophomore year, I was getting in the process of being broken up with, so I was very sad and angry. And every day kind of felt like there was a dark cloud over my heart, if you will. Like I don't know if you've ever been so depressed that it feels like a dark cloud is over you, but that's how I felt, and every day was kind of getting worse. Now, architecture students, if you know anything about them, they don't sleep, but I chose in this time to sleep, so I can't explain what happened to me with a lack of sleep. But essentially, when I did my final reviews for my project and went home to sleep, around midnight, I started hearing a rustling in my room, like kind of like just stuff going through my stuff in my room. And I thought that a bat or a bird or something had gotten into my room, and so I was kind of getting ready to get up and just catch it to throw it out. Whatever it was noticed that I was getting up and immediately like rapidly moved to my neck and grabbed it uh and strangled me. And at that point I thought I was being robbed. Uh and so I kind of like don't remember what happened because I was basically strangled and fell asleep. Uh I came to, not sure what was going on, and so I instantly started praying, Christ Jesus, please protect me. I don't know if there's a robber in my room. And I decided if it was a robber, I was gonna pounce on him and grab him. So I kind of sneakily, well, he was still going through my room, whatever it was, and so I sneakily kind of crouched. I got out of my bed, crouched, and tried to hop on top of it, him, and whatever him or it was, froze me in the air when I was about to hop on him, and then not like stationary in the air. I said froze. That's not the right word. It was like all my momentum that I put to fling myself onto him inverted, and I was instantly flung back onto the bed. It's difficult for me to understand what happened, but like you'd think if it with momentum you'd like experience like the drag of being stopped and then fall back. But no, this is imagine if you could like imagine all the momentum you put forward just inverts instantly and you throw yourself back. It's like kind of like anti-gravity or something. I don't know. It was very bizarre. I never really had the ability to describe the experience because it's just not natural to experience momentum like that. You can't just invert momentum. You have to reach zero first and then go backwards. But I experienced an inversion of momentum. And so I was cast back under my bed and fell onto it. I was like, okay, this thing is not a human or a robber. It is something I don't know. I I was like, okay, Christ Jesus, I don't know what's going on. Please protect me. And I tried to grab it, but I just grabbed air, nothing. And then it just kind of like fled out my window, whatever it was. So maybe it was ball lightning, maybe it was something else. I have no idea, but that was enough reason for me to never go back to that dorm again. Luckily, it was the end of the semester, so I packed my bags and ran. Never came back. Um, Went to a different dorm on the other side of the campus. I purposely chose the building on the other side of the campus. And for a while, I thought it was like schizophrenic or crazy, but nothing like that really ever happened again. I've had a few other experiences like that, not necessarily at that dorm. And I want to say like nothing like this ever happened before that event. I've had like dreams of like spiritual things, but never like physical like that. And since then, to this day, I occasionally get like this feeling that like whatever that thing was, it's near. I like to say that, like, when that thing grabbed my neck, it wasn't just that I was feeling pain. I could almost sense it was feeling pain too, and I attribute that to the protection of Christ. I don't know. That's just my religion speaking, and so I'm going to assume that it tried to hurt me, and it was hurting because Christ was protecting me. It was able to touch me, but it was not able to, I guess, invade me. I don't know. Um, but the interface of being in contact with that kind of left a scar, and I just always can sense when something's not right ever since that thing touched me. It's kind of like the Frodo scene where like the blade touched them, and the Witch King stabbed him with that blade, and from then on he could always sense when something evil was near. Kind of got that too, and it's like almost like a gift and a curse at the same time because I just kind of know something's up when I feel it. Something evil's lurking. Uh, though in terms of direct physical experiences, nothing like that really has ever happened again. There was one instance which I might regard as something like a non-human being. I woke up one morning. This is when I came home from my after I graduated. It was a few years after I graduated, and I was kind of, I guess I'd say I was sick. I forget what, with maybe the flu or something. But I woke up to very strange lights, columns of light. Not beings, but columns of light. And one approached me and attempted to speak to me, but instead of hearing words, if you could imagine if every word in a paragraph was spoken at the same time, so that you just heard a garbled mess of like various like parts of words that none you can make out, like just a garbled mess. That's what I heard. And I heard it at such a large volume and a pressure that it hurt my ears. And I kind of just woke up. And when I woke up, my ears were popped. And I, to this day, cannot explain it. I'd like to say it was a dream, but dreams don't pop your ears. And so that was a very strange experience to me. That happened maybe 3 or 4 years ago. That's since the thing that happened in my dorm, that's the weirdest thing that's happened to me. And I don't know. I remember seeing like maybe it was 5 columns of light, 7 columns of light. I don't know. I was kind of distracted by the one column speaking to me that was incomprehensibly large volume of words that blew my eardrums. It was just a very bizarre experience. And so at that point, that was about 3 years ago, I decided that I don't like these things, and I started praying to God that they don't happen again. Don't care if there's an angel or demon. I don't want this stuff to happen again. And since then, those things haven't happened. And so I'm thankful that God has essentially stopped it because whatever spiritual forces those were, I'm confident that God can fight them, not me. So I'm not going to bother with them. Um, took some lion's mane, which is a mushroom that helps heal neurological conditions. Like in my mind, I'm thinking either I'm becoming a prophet or I'm going insane. Either way, these mushrooms should probably heal my nervous system. And admittedly, they worked pretty well, and I haven't really had anything of the spiritual sort like that in a while. Um, I kind of at this point was of the belief that I don't need signs and wonders anymore. I think my faith benefits from working off of what I've already experienced and learned from scripture. And I don't need signs and wonders. I think that's now more of a hindrance. At some point in those days, I was kind of starting to become dependent on seeing signs and wonders, and I was like concerned that this was making it into an idol. And so I was like, okay, God, I want to just focus on you. The signs and wonders can be for someone else who doesn't know you. I've been monologuing for a while. I don't really have any questions about what I've just asked. That's kind of like the close of the beings. I maybe have one or two more topics to bring up on that, but kind of good point to pause for a question from you.
Yeah, extremely interesting right off the gate. Lots to unpack there. A lot of interesting experiences. But I want to go to the one where you tried to jump on the entity that was in your room. And maybe I just missed it when you were going past it. But can you describe in as much detail as you can what you actually saw or perceived? What did this entity look like? Size, color, shape, anything, all you can remember.
It was too dark to get a clear. It was midnight. I probably should have mentioned it. It was too dark to really see much. If I could put it, if I could, it's just cloud of darkness. It was just a cloud. Um, hence why I thought it was a robber. It was a man's. It was like the thing is, it wasn't initially man-sized. initially looked like it was some small thing in the corner of my room going through my things, and I thought a bat had gotten in. But as I attempted to grab it or go for it, it expanded into man size to grab my neck. Like it didn't obey normal conservation of mass. It could change its volume. I guess some scientists might call that four-dimensional, where you perceive in the three dimension, it's like changing volume. It's just transitioning through the third dimension from the fourth. That's what physicists have explained to me. What I might have seen as a joke, but I was like, that kind of actually makes sense. Um, yeah, not gonna say money, no features. It's just a cloud. Even in the cloud itself, it wasn't a cloud proper. It was just a smudge of darkness. When it touched me, it felt like I could see it, but not with my eyes. And I could, because like when it touched me, and I felt like this. I don't know if you've ever been electrocuted. I have because I'm an idiot. But electrocution feels like a fizzly burning feeling. Like almost like when you drink like seltzer or carbonated water, there's like that fizzle on your tongue. Imagine that, but also you're being burned. And when this thing touched me, it was like that, but instead of burning, it was cold. It was like a fizzly cold burning. I've only like I don't know if you've ever washed yourself in really hot water after you were in cold temperature. Your body almost confuses the hot for the cold, and you kind of feel like the burning from the hot water is cold that you felt outside. Imagine that if you've been out in like frigid environments and come in for a hot bath, you might know what I'm talking about. But imagine that with like this fizzly electrical feeling. Um, and when it touched me, it was like there was a transition, like an understanding of emotion, and I was feeling fear, and it was feeling fear, and I didn't know why it was feeling fear, so I assumed it seemed almost like it didn't want to touch me, like it tried to touch me to like pass me out, like I kind of lost consciousness, but it didn't want to keep touching me. And when I woke up, it was back to going through my things. And I didn't mention before it left my room. When I grabbed it and there was just air, it did kind of smack me. So it could touch me, but I couldn't touch it. And yet, as it touched me, it was pain. I could tell. I don't know how, but I just knew it was experiencing pain. And I wasn't really experiencing pain. I was just feeling a cold, electrical, dark feeling. But again, I can't really say physical characteristics. When it did touch me and I felt that electrical sense, like my brain wanted to generate an image of something with a lot of teeth, but like it wasn't what I wasn't seeing something with a lot of teeth. I felt like my lizard brain was trying to invent a predator that wasn't there and fill in the gap with something. But all I can describe it as is just nothingness, chaos, darkness, something like that.
Very interesting. So you've experienced physical triangle-shaped UFO. You've experienced the traditional sort of orbs of light or electricity, and you've also had sort of close encounters appear even in your bedroom. So I guess that brings us to the natural question of, how do you interpret these phenomenon? Do you believe that these were human experimental aircraft classified? Do you believe these were visitors from another planet? Do you believe that these were fallen angels or demons, or some variation thereof? How do you conceptualize this?
Yeah, I mean, in the scriptures, we see that the angels have their rings within rings for craft, and so in my mind, I've always kind of inflated that aliens, angels, demons, they're all the same thing. And I suppose, you know, I know my school is doing research into experimental stuff. I know that there's a lot of ball lightning that shows up above my campus. As a matter of fact, I'll post it in the chat, but if you look at the weather history for Rensselaer, the weather goes around us. There's a bubble that like when Hurricane Irene hit us, it went around us like a little bubble formed and the storm wouldn't go over us. So there's something crazy going on there. I'll try and find a photo of it and post it in chat later. There's some wonky stuff going on. So in many ways I want to just say yes to all the things you mentioned. Like it's all the same thing. This in my worst nightmares I think of like, well, if Satan knows he only has a few generations left to corrupt people, why wouldn't he present himself as an alien and offer wisdom. Um, why wouldn't you? Like, if you knew you only had a few more centuries left, maybe 1,000 years, who knows? Why wouldn't you spend those last 1,000 years kind of revealing yourself as something from beyond that these secular humans who don't really remember their religion anymore would interpret as aliens? You'd gain their trust instantly because you're more enlightened, right? You're from something beyond. But I mean, you could just be stuck on this earth as a prisoner and pretending to be these things. Yeah.
Right. So I guess given that you're viewing these experiences through the lens of your Christianity, why don't I ask you, have you always been a Christian? Was there a particular point in your life where you became convicted or born again? And if so, when was that and how did that come about? In other words, where did you or how did you come by, your faith in Christ?
Yeah, I was raised Catholic and couldn't really cope with the contradictory behaviors of the priests and the Christians around me versus what the Bible said. When I was growing up, I should mention that, like, when I was growing up, I had some nerve damage from a condition known as pandas, literally spelled like the animal, Pandas. This is a rare uh, immune system problem that happens with, like, very rarely when you get strep throat, your body will develop an immune response that causes it to attack its own neurons. And so I had this for about 3 or 4 years of just like kind of ticks and twitches and like OCD behavior while my nervous system healed. Hence why I've always had the thought in my mind that maybe everything I've experienced was just delusions because I had nerve damage as a kid. But like, why can I still think rationally and succeed in a career in life? So it can't be pure insanity. I don't know. But in those years when I was getting bullied and annoyed, and because I wasn't developing like everyone else around me, I started reading the Bible and discovering that uh yeah, the people around me aren't acting like proper Christians. So I kind of, in some ways, the Bible at first made me an atheist because I was like, well, these people are not following this text. And I tried Buddhism for a little while to like meditate and clear all my attachments, and that helped a little bit. But ultimately, I decided that the goal of Buddhism, the Tabula Rasa, I don't, I can't see that as an end, and I don't necessarily want to free myself from whatever cycle they're talking about. I think getting to a Tabula Rasa is good, but that's only because now you can build something better on it. And so that's what brought me back to Christ initially is enough to go back to church. You know, I say go back to church, but I'm not sure if I ever really stopped. I think I just stopped believing when I went to church, but it was just what you did on Sunday. Um, and so when I hit that point of meditation, I think I mentioned in chats before, but there was this point when I was meditating and I fell asleep and I awoke in a um in a state without a body in this vision, and I can't put it to words because you can't really describe nothingness. No smell, no hearing, no eyes, no ears. No, it was just vision where I didn't have anything. I guess that's something akin to their idea of enlightenment. I don't know, but I hit this point where it's like I'll never be able to describe this moment because words inherently describe things, and what I was experiencing was nothingness. All I can say is that I knew I wasn't alone, and that kind of tilted me towards maybe Christianity is real. And then at the end of that was at the start of high school, and at the end of high school, first semester of college, I kind of had a breaking down moment because architecture is hard. The programs are difficult. You just don't sleep the first semester. And it's just they treat you like shit. So I had this moment where I was just, okay, God, I think I know you're there, but I'm gonna need some sign, proof, that that I'm not crazy. And at that moment in my freshman year, I had a bit of a insight. I'm not gonna say vision, but I just knew in my heart I had to sit at this chair that I pass by often when I go to classes. I just kind of saw that. I say saw, but like the abstract. I have to go there at this time. I think it was like 5:57, some ridiculous exact PM time, and it just weighed heavily on my heart. It seemed like the most ridiculous thing. Well, why am I getting this urge to go sit in this chair at this exact time? And so I just did. I went there a few minutes early. I sat down, took out my laptop, and just started laughing. And I just I must be going crazy. I just sat down here because I had an urge to in my heart. And at the exact minute of 5:57, I think, a friend, a Catholic friend actually, but someone who's also leaving the Catholic Church for Baptists, uh, came into the little shop where the chair was, saw me, and invited me to a Christian event that was going, like a prayer event that was going on at the campus Christian. And I got the hint to just check the time. It was the exact minute that I was told to be there, and this person's inviting me to pray. And I thought that's pretty cool miracle for me at least. Chance of that pretty low. So I'm gonna take it on a whim that this is proof God wants me to do this, and God's real. And so at that point, I became Christian again, and have been since. I guess I kind of fell in love with Luther's writing around maybe 6 years ago, and because a lot of his writing was dealing with corrupt church structure, and he was lamenting a lot of the pedophilia and corruption in the church in his day, and he incidentally, I didn't know this until later on, but he did a little bit of exorcisms here and there, and advice on how to handle exorcisms. This is a lesser known fact of Luther, but he was actually occasionally an exorcist and wrote about differentiating between genuine exorcisms and possessions and just people wanting a scam. And he was remarkably doubtful about these things. But like reading this person who could think in a very modern way, materialist way, but still allow room for the spiritual, made me want to be Lutheran, because he seemed to be someone who could like explain a lot of these like worldly versus spiritual divisions. And I kind of nowadays realize, yeah, Luther was at the tail end of the medieval era, but the start of the Renaissance, so he's kind of in both worlds, and so he was able to explain both of those ways of thinking. So I decided to go along with Lutheranism instead of Catholicism, although I still occasionally read the saints, read the Apostolic Fathers, and enjoy their poetry a lot. I'm not going to pretend to be some arbiter of truth and decide that's when the Catholic Church went astray. That's when the Catholic Church went astray. That's when it went, I don't know. At some point in time, I feel like the authority that the church was given in Rome, I don't think it started there. Obviously, it started in Jerusalem. But at some point in time, it moved from Jerusalem to Rome. And then from Rome, I think it moved somewhere else. I think the Holy Spirit just nestles in on institutions willing to obey. And when they don't, it flies away to a new institution. What that one is today, I don't know. I wouldn't even necessarily think it is Lutheranism nowadays, because genuine Christian Lutherans are few, and most Lutherans in America are adopting strange and pagan practices. There's like her church out in California, which follows a female Jesus now. It's like, what the hell is going on? The Lutheran Church in America seems very collapsing, and so I'm sometimes wondering, am I going to be the last of a few Lutherans left who still follow this? I don't know. I just like his writings, so I decided to join up with the churches that still follow some of his advice. That's how I got to where I am now. I guess that's another good point to pause.
Yes, thank you. So we've now covered aliens and we've covered Christianity. So the third topic that you brought up was genetic engineering. I'm wondering, is this, do you see this as being connected to these alien experiences, or is this a discrete topic in your mind?
Yeah. Well, I did also want to talk about Christian Canon, but we can take a bit of a detour to genetic engineering, because that's kind of what I'm going to be doing a PhD on. So I during quarantine, what is that now, like 2 years going in almost? I had a lot of extra time. Uh, I I live in New York City and have about a 4-hour commute before quarantine. Without that, when we were working from home, that's 4 extra hours a day to do something. And I tried writing, I tried animating, I tried learning a few skills. I even did the sourdough baking stuff. But I started thinking I want to challenge myself. And at that point in time, there was a YouTuber, Thought Emporium, who was doing a few biohacking tutorials, and he had this crazy idea of trying to get yeast to make spider silk, and he couldn't do it. He couldn't figure out how to do it. He had tried it like a dozen times and wasted $2,000 and couldn't get it done. And I was looking over his problems, and this is a subject which I had vaguely studied in undergrad and had a growing interest in, and just kind of looked over what was wrong, and I could tell what the problem was. His problem was that he was trying to get the printers that they use to print out DNA to print the same repeating thing over and over again. And as you can guess, a thing like spider silk has a lot of repeats because you have a chain of basically the same thing over and over again. And that's all good for the spider's body to make, but if you try and get a machine to make it, the machine kind of gets confused because the way the DNA gets printed is that it's this complicated process. I'm going to use a printing analogy to help explain it. So let's say you have an old time printing press, and the way in which this printing press works is that every time you want to use it, first you have to coat the surface of the block with the letter on it with a material. Then you have to stamp it into the paper. Then you have to coat the material again, and then you have to double check that it actually got into the paper, and you have to coat it again and move on to the next letter. It's a very complicated process, genetic printing. And I could tell that the problem this YouTuber was having was that when you have these repeats, the machine gets confused. It can't tell how many times it's verified the same thing. Because if you're printing the same thing over and over again, you're going to get false positives that you printed it. And so this is going to ruin the whole machine. And so I had this whole complicated system, but in order to print out these proteins are made of amino acids, and amino acids are made of DNA. 3 letters of DNA create one of 16 or so amino acids, and amino acids combine to form a protein. Now, if you have a lot of repeating amino acids, turns out there's multiple DNA letters that make the same amino acid. So instead of just doing the same DNA over and over again to get the same amino acid, you randomize a bit. You get a few different variations of the same DNA that produces the same amino acid. And I figured out his problem. And I wrote that down and then never talked to him. I never mentioned it. And about 8 months into quarantine, he got on YouTube and said he solved the problem. And it was the solution that I had thought up. And at that point, I realized I knew this better than a genetic engineer. I can actually do this. I'm not an idiot. And so I immediately looked at all the equipment he has and contacted a few labs, got some connections. I decided I'm actually going to do this. I'm going to start getting into this because if I can figure out these problems faster than he can by months, I might actually be good at this. And so I did it. And yeah, like a few weeks later, I had yeast that was making spider silk all on my own. I had done what he had taken 2 years to do in about 8 weeks. I was like, I'm actually pretty good at this. Oh my goodness. So that thus created a series of inventive tasks, which I'm still doing to this day. And I decided, you know what? Maybe I can get out of my dead end job and find a more exciting career. I love my work, but it's not going anywhere. Pays well, but I'll never go anywhere at this place. And I'm a bit prideful and I want to be someone somewhat day. So I decided to contact a few professors, show them what I've been doing, and ask if they have any openings. And I kind of knew that once Brexit happened in the UK and Europe, that there'd probably be a lot of openings for research because a lot of places are losing their EU funding. Lo and behold, I was right. So a professor reached out to me and says, yes, we have a few seats opening and you look like you're doing some really cool stuff. Come on over. Sent my papers in, got approved, and got to start a PhD program soon. All that's to say that genetic engineering is a very rigorous but tangible thing that even someone like myself, who doesn't even have a degree in bioengineering, even I can get into it and kind of get a hang of it. It's not hard. It's not easy. It's kind of just technical. And once you learn the way things work, it works. Now, one of the things I realized while doing this is that if I can be doing something this sophisticated on like cheap hand-me-down hardware and use lab equipment, then maybe other people are doing things more nefarious than me. And that got me thinking a little bit more conspiracy thinking. So yeah, at this point in my mind, I think if there's ever an alien contact or something like that, I think it's going to be something our government made just in a lab. I think you may not know this, but at this point in time, the government and various funding organizations have been identifying alternative DNA letters. So all of us and everything on life is built off of 4 DNA letters, but there are actually more that don't show up on Earth life. These are just like chemical consequences that you can discover. And over the last couple of years, there have been reports that they've discovered 2 or 3 more letters. And that makes me realize that it would not be difficult to create something with an alternative DNA scheme that looks like nothing else on Earth. And the government could just present it as like, we found aliens and you have to believe us. And that kind of freaked me out because like there would be really nothing stopping the government or anyone really, even an NGO outside of the government, from doing that. I did what I did. I inserted the silk gene into yeast for a grand total of $400. It's very cheap to do. It cost me $400 to get yeast that makes spider silk. To do something at a larger scale, like grays, like your typical grays, that's a lot of deleting of genes, not adding of genes. You're just kind of deleting proteins that make skin behave a certain way. There's the ABBCC1 gene, which some people have. This gene, for example, is just one of many. This gene has a simple mutation, which as a result deactivates body odor and also makes hardened earwax. It happens to be that the same gene that makes your earwax like gooey is the same gene that makes a food source for bacteria on your skin, thus giving you BO. One gene can do that. And just by deleting like a handful of genes, you got something that doesn't even look human, but can have a human intellect. And that would cost maybe only a few $1,000s. Think about the funding that billions of dollars could create. You could just straight up lie and make another species and present them as more enlightened. And then you, the government, have the authority to like verify what they're saying as the translator, right? They could just be apes made to look like aliens speaking gibberish. But you, the translator, the government, get to say what they're saying and basically exercise authority over millions of people who want to follow the enlightened visitors. I keep thinking about it daily. I'm like, yeah, it's not. It's hard as far as our research, but it's not complicated. It's really not. And to do this would be extraordinarily cheap, and for a very cheap price, you would get almost total control of like the like society, parts of your society that want to follow whatever. I don't know. There's a good pause if you want to think about that for a second.
Yeah, it's extremely interesting concepts and information. I feel like we could go into genetic engineering for a long time, so I just want to kind of limit myself to maybe one question about it. But what do you think is the potential for genetic engineering to, in some sense, cause unforeseen or foreseen existential threats? Do you think genetic engineering is something that could get loose into the wild and destroy our food supply, or create some kind of deadly pandemic that would wipe everybody out? Or do you think genetic engineering is safe, or do you think it's something that actually threatens us substantially?
Yeah, there's. I write short stories for fun, which I don't publish. They're not really great, but I'm hoping one day they'll get great. And a lot of this gets worked in. So I've started writing down like the horror things that you could do as a story plot idea. One author I know that you might want to explore who also is a biologist and knows these things is Peter Watts. He wrote a pretty good story called Blind Sight, and he's Canadian too. So, no, sorry, I forget if he's Canadian or Minnesotan. But one of the ideas that he proposes is you could make a pretty simple virus that would turn off your bone DNA that tells it to stop growing. So you would just keep growing bone, like bone cancer, basically. And that's only a few genes that would just deactivate. So you just have like bone cancer plague, and everyone would just slowly turn to stone. It also has a few of the horrors that involve like, uh, you know, you can bud things, mutations onto the existing hardware that no one would even know. Really, you might get a case of the flu as your immune system responds to it, but the consequences might be a modified neuron. Maybe you decide that the synapses get a little bit of a modification, so that now they're gonna be sensitive to certain radio signals, and that's entirely dependent on what's known as a metal protein, which is a protein that binds metal and allows you to kind of get different sensitivities that are related to metal. So you can literally like program a antenna into your neurons, and the neuron will grow a little antenna and start receiving signals. In fact, this is a series of developments that people are investigating for non-invasive brain computer interfaces. You don't have to run wires into your brain. You could just edit your neurons to grow a little antenna with metal proteins and just have a Wi-Fi connection. The and you would never even know. The virus could be released to do that now, and you would never know. You would just get the flu, and you would not know that at a molecular level, your neuron now has a little antenna that will be sensitive to certain radio frequencies, depending on how large of an antenna it is. A metallurgy protein is less than 500 base pairs. It can be fit into a little virus. and that virus just unleashed as a common cold, and you would just have that on huge stretches of the population. It would obviously be different for different people. You'd also need a way of getting it into the brain before the immune system caught it, which would be difficult. Um, but that's just one example. There's plenty of other examples. One of the ones I've thought up for short stories is if you were to cause a climate crisis, what you would do is you would get uh, a few species of plankton that are in the sea, and you would give them the UCP protein. And the UCP protein is a protein in many. It's basically one of your main proteins for generating heat, and so uh, it's a mutation on the ATP protein, which is one of the many proteins that processes energy in your body. It converts food to energy work, and so it's just part of the digestive system. Really, every cell deals with ATP. Uh, Turns out that your body also has a mutated, broken version of this, and instead of generating chemical work for your body to do, which just generates heat, it's mutated and it's so inefficient that instead of doing energy, it produces heat. And no different than like wiring a battery on itself and letting it generate heat. It's just done doing that at a protein level. And that UCP protein is about 500 base pairs too. You just take that, put it into a plankton mitochondrial DNA, RNA, I think. Have the mitochondria start generating heat, and you put it in the ocean, and next thing you know, your oceans are warming up. And if you wanted to replace the existing plankton, you would add in a toxic protein that would be attached to what's known as an alpha mating sequence. Alpha mating sequences are the direct. I like to joke the alpha mating sequence is a DNA sequence that tells something to shit. It's the shit DNA. It's basically just little sequence that signals the cell to eject something. So you have a DNA sequence, and at the very end, you attach the code for an alpha sequence. The cell will print out the sequence, tap it with the alpha protein, and it will know to just excrete that protein out. And so if you have the UCP protein plankton with a toxic molecule attached to a alpha protein sequence, it would essentially kill other members of its species that don't have the mutation. And then you'd of course program into the cell an immunity to this toxin. It would be something that you could develop an immunity to. The cell would replace itself in the natural environment and start generating heat and warm your waters. You'd have a climate emergency within a few years. And unless you knew what you were looking for, you wouldn't know why the ocean's getting warmer. You would just assume it's because of the sun or pollution. And if you trust the government, you just believe what they say. There's a million and one ways you can do it. It's kind of terrifying. UCP protein is a really interesting one. For my interests, I just view it as a potential energy source. So if you could have like yeast that would eat garbage and produce heat, you'd have a pretty good source of energy there for like a home or something. It could literally eat your shit and generate electricity for your home. Nice little sustainability there. And my interest is mostly sustainability. So like the things I'm researching are like the protein that I designed has on one side a graphene binder, and on the other side a graphene binder, and in between is a silica binder. And this allows you to bind silica and graphene together into a kind of concrete material, and so you have a sustainable brick that you can just grow out of yeast. Or you can also do a fibrous material with the ligands in plants and have it attached to an alpha mating protein, so that the cell just poops out fibers and dries into a wood source that you don't have to cut down trees anymore. In my mind, I'm thinking like positively because I can see all the negative ways this thing can be used for. It's horrible. So I want to get into the positives first and get them, if possible, get those things patented so that at least I can make money on the positive when some nefarious person does something negative. I think you also mentioned there's some of the question you mentioned about what this could be used for. I'm trying to remember. Oh, preventing it to get into the ecosystem. So if you're a good scientist, what you do is you program into your modifications a dependency gene. Usually what this accounts to is you make the gene unable to produce some fundamental life thing without something you put into the petri dish. A lot of times that will be one of the you'll make it so that the cell can only make one letter of its DNA from a chemical in your petri dish. It falls out of petri dish, it can't make its own DNA, it just dies from being unable to fix its own DNA mutations. And so these are just like ways that, like you always want to aim for programmable dependency. And obviously any evil governments are probably thinking, how can I do it for a person also? But if your cell is dependent on something in your lab, it can't exist in a natural environment. So you always want to make sure that, if you're getting into this stuff and you decide to take a fly with it, always program in dependency, sugar dependency or proteins, some kind of like initial medium dependency, something that the cell is dependent on you to survive. So if it ever gets free, it can't actually live outside of your environment. It just dies. That's your basics failsafe. That's a fundamental failsafe. Everybody does this as a standard of an industry, because if you don't and something bad happens, you're gonna get executed by some angry government somewhere. Um, I guess I should also mention, like, I've done like basic analyses of, like, the COVID proteins and see if there's anything spooky in there. And yeah, it's occasionally something spooky. I think the most interesting thing I found in some of the vaccines is a relic sequence from a pharmaceutical bacteria. And I can't tell if this is part of the original COVID uh, virus, or if it's part of the vaccine that they stripped the parts of the virus out to make an immunity to. But it's it's from a pharmaceutical bacteria that's used to produce drugs, and so that kind of hints that the COVID virus kind of obviously was at least partially artificial. As far as I can tell, most of the COVID virus comes from a lineage of viruses that were well documented in Wuhan. Documenting this virus goes back to like 2015, possibly no, 2005, by various researchers in China who were aware that there were problems happening. Like, there's a few doctors who were writing articles. I'm sorry I don't have names. I can't remember the Chinese names, but if you just look up Wuhan, like, researcher raises alarm on bat virus, you'll probably find a few pre-COVID articles about it. She particularly documented as early as like 2008 that this particular virus in Wuhan amongst the bats was developing. It was like diversifying. It was developing a few mutations, and some of these looked possibly compatible with the human body. And so she warned, if there's close contact between these bats and humans, there's a risk of a mutation that'll make it compatible with human biology. And mind you, even if you get compatible with human biology, that's just one step in the process of becoming a threat to humanity. A virus can live in a human body, but it may not have the ability to replicate in the human body. To replicate in the human body, it has to develop a specific attachment protein. And that we all know now as a spike protein. That was the mutation that happened that allowed it to attach to human cells and thus replicate. You might think actually that the spike protein could have been engineered in a lab, because if you were researching it, the thing about coronaviruses is that, as you know, they spread very quickly. And so if you could get a modified coronavirus to attach to a human being, you could deliver medicine pretty quickly. And so I'm willing to give the Chinese the benefit of the doubt that the gain of function research they were doing was primarily medicinal, that they were looking to use the coronavirus as a modified virus that would attach to a human cell, deliver drugs, and then not be able to actually replicate in the human cell. But at some point in time, they fucked up, and it was able to not only attach to the human cell, but replicate in the human body. And when that happened, as you know, several lab officials got infected. They brought it into the general population unknowingly, or knowingly if you're a conspiracy theorist, and they accidentally unleashed what we have today. All I can tell you is that the research into that lab has been going on for over a decade, and it was inevitable that something was going to happen.
So this has been extremely interesting content, and we could definitely do an entire podcast about this topic, and indeed I'd like to do that with you in the future. But we still have a fairly significant can of worms to unpack with the Christian Canon.
Yes.
So I think we should pivot now to that so that we can cover all your topics and then turn it over to some audience questions.
Yeah.
Well, just what did you want to talk about with regards to the Christian Canon? Do you have thoughts about what is and isn't appropriately canon, or where did you want to go with that?
Yeah, so the concept of a canon, the established books in the Bible that we have today, I think today there's like 66 books or something. It's often assumed that this is the way it always has been, but that's not exactly true. Those core 66 books do show up in all canons, but other denominations and older churches have had different additional books depending on their location. I always like to start with what was the situation before Christ came on the scene. Why did he have such a big impact? And I think people don't often realize that Christ actually entered into a prophetic time. At the time of Jesus, we all know about the Pharisees and the Pharisees and Sadducees, but there are other groups such as the Zealots and the Essenes, and these groups are less visible in the New Testament because by the time of Christ, they had voluntarily or involuntarily been evacuated from the Sanhedrin. Then they were kicked out. The Essenes left willingly. The Essenes were kind of reactionary. They were just very against what was going on. And so they decided to go out into the desert and write in the what we today call Dead Sea Scrolls area, the Qumran, I think it's called. And the Zealots went off to fight their wars and lose those wars. But if you read the Dead Sea Scrolls, there are very interesting books that the Essenes wrote. And also, it turns out that many of their books were preserved in the southern churches in Ethiopia. The Ethiopian Canon contains many Dead Sea Scroll texts, and as a migration route, it seems pretty obvious. The Dead Sea Scrolls were found in southern parts of Israel into Sinai, I think I remember correctly. And if you keep going south, you reach Ethiopia. So this seems to have been a southern branch of Judaism growing south, and then the Zealots went kind of northward, I think, and fought their wars and died in Syria, ultimately in Lebanon. But there is an interesting part of Enoch, my favorite book of the Enoch is a interesting text because it seems to have been written mostly in the 100 BC area, right before Jesus. But within Enoch, it is mentioned that in chapter 10 of Enoch, it's mentioned that there are 70 generations from Enoch to the Messiah. This is mentioned in chapter 10, and I believe it's also repeated elsewhere. And as you know, if you read your New Testament, there are indeed 70 generations from Enoch to Jesus. So it's interesting that the people in the Dead Sea Scroll writing knew that they were living in the 70th generation from Enoch. They knew that they should be looking out for the Messiah. Now, I'd like to very quickly read a section of one of the chapter 48. Yeah, chapter 48 of Enoch contains a prophecy of the Messiah, of what they should look for on the 70th generation. Again, this was written about 100 years before Jesus, but just tell me if this sounds like Jesus. So chapter 48, verse 3 says, "At that hour, the Son of Man was given a name, in the presence of Yahweh of hosts, in the before time, even before the creation of the sun and the moon, before the creation of the stars, he was given a name in the presence of Yahweh of hosts. He will become a staff for the righteous ones, in order that they may lean on him and not fall. He is the light of the Gentiles, and he will become the hope of those who are sick in their hearts. All those who dwell upon the earth shall fall and worship before him. They shall magnify, bless, and sing the name of Yahweh of hosts. For this purpose he became the chosen one. He was concealed in the presence of Yahweh of hosts prior to the creation and for eternity. And he has revealed the wisdom of Yahweh of hosts to the righteous and the dedicated ones. For he has preserved the portion of the righteous, because they have hated and despised this world of oppression, together with all of its ways of life and being, and the habits of it, in the name of Yahweh of hosts. And because they will be saved in his name, and it is a good pleasure that they have life. It is his good pleasure that they have life." And so that little section, chapter 48, 3 through 7, it sounds so much like Jesus that no wonder these people were they knew who they saw when they saw Jesus. He was doing all these things and saying all these things. And even within that container, you kind of see like a proto-Trinitarian view that the Messiah is one with the Father. He was pre-creation, he's eternal. He was hidden in the Father before creation, so that creation didn't know about him, and he was revealed for eternity. Those like kind of proto-Trinitarian beliefs were already in Judaism before the canon was started. And so it's often thought that, the Trinity is from Constantine. It was all introduced in like the Romans and stuff like that. Nah, already before Jesus, the Essenes and the southern branches of Judaism that were kind of growing apart from the Pharisees and Sadducees, they already knew there was a Trinity, or at least something like a Trinity. And if you read in between the lines, there was a Trinity here because concealed in his presence, the word presence there actually means spirit. So there's three members. There's Yahweh, the chosen one, and his presence. There's a Trinity. In fact, an alternative translation of the Holy Spirit, which in Aramaic or Hebrew is Ruach HaKodesh, An alternative translation from Holy Spirit would actually be the dedicated presence. And I've always found that translation pretty comforting because it means that the Holy Spirit won't leave you if you get worrying. It takes a lot for making him run away. But anyway, I happened to meet a magi. I've mentioned this a few times. Someone from Syria who claimed to be a magi. He was an old man who came from Syria, one of the many refugees of the last 50 years. And he taught me some of these things and told me to read Enoch, and kind of was an eye opener for the development of the canon. I came to realize that before Jesus ever set foot on this world as Jesus, some Jews already knew there was a Trinity, and they knew that in the 70th generation since Enoch, which was the generation of Jesus, that there would be a Messiah. And as you look at Luke or the other genealogies in the New Testament, that is when Jesus showed up. He's counted as the 70th from Enoch. So there was already a prophecy that Jesus, the 70th from Enoch, would be in that era. The Messiah would come in that era. Now, in terms of broader books of the canon, I'll go through it very quickly. The folks, I guess a lot of conspiracy or, very heavily anti-Catholic people, admittedly, the Catholic Church has had a heavy influence on what canon is, but it's always important to remember that the concept of canon is not a Roman invention, nor did the Pope invent it. The concept of canon exists detached from the Roman Empire. Ethiopians and Indians and Georgians and Armenians were all understanding what the canon was outside the Roman Empire and beyond its influence. This was nothing that the popes decided; they just kind of attached it. I was also asked to mention what are some oldest scriptures in the East, because I think people know about the papyri of the West that are typically 2nd and 3rd century. But if you want to see older texts, there's something called the Diatessaron. The Diatessaron is a kind of, it's a harmony gospel is what's known of it. So before the 4 gospels were formally 4 gospels, there were some groups that were kind of writing from the oral tradition as one single text, and this was more popular in Syria. The Diatessaron, which I think in Aramaic is spelled Evangelion Damheliot. It's a harmony gospel from about 160 AD. So this is about 60 years after John died, basically. So 2nd generation Christians, 3rd generations maybe. They already had a formified gospel in Syria. It was all 4 gospels grouped into one text. And by that I mean it was kind of merged. It had no repeats. It was again, a gospel harmony is more of an Eastern thing. They didn't have 4 gospels. They had one united gospel that was considered from multiple oral traditions. If you know enough apostolic tradition in the West, what happened is that near the Apostle John's death, the churches gathered around his dying body basically and said, hey, we don't actually know what's from you and what's from liars. Before you die, would you mind helping us figure this out? And this is a bit of a traditional view, but it's thought that John worked out the 3 gospels and then wrote his own, and then he died shortly after. There's also the Curtonian Gospels, or the Siglum Sirik. The Curtonian Gospels are from also this era, and that's another series of Gospels in Syria. These are all 1st, 2nd, and 3rd century. They're very ancient texts. They're not well documented in the West because the West is too busy bombing these places to read any of their books. A much later text from, I think, the 697 AD is just the Syriac Sinaiticus, which is just a general pamphlet in the East. And if you want to go really far east, there's the Xi'an stele, which is from, I believe, the year 780, which is one of the oldest Chinese gospels found in Mongolia. So very early, before any, it wasn't until Trent that the gospel was firmly established as the 66 books we have today. Before that, it was understood that there are 66 for sure books, but there were many books besides that other groups, such like I was mentioned, Ethiopia and Armenia and Georgia and India. In India, they are known as the St. Thomas Christians. That's where St. Thomas went. These people, far away from Rome and detached from Roman influences, had their own canons with different books that the Romans didn't even know about. So it's difficult. There are many conspiracies about Rome inventing Christianity to do this and that, but that doesn't really explain why there are different canons with different books outside of the Roman Empire. They just had their own traditions because the apostles went different ways. So the St. Thomas Christians have other books. If you want to read them, they're the Acts of Thomas is a really great book from India. This is Thomas's little journal that he went to India. It also documents how he fell in love in India. So there's a lot of nice little cute things in there too. If you're not just in it for the religion, you get to hear St. Thomas's love poem to his future wife. It's quite a beautiful little book to read if you want to read it. It's actually very cute. His wife was not a Hindu woman, but a Jewish woman born in India. I think she might have been half Hindi, and he just falls like he explains how he fell in love with her beautiful brown skin and hair, luscious hair, and the beautiful way she spoke in her in both the Hebrew and her music flutes. And so she was just like kind of beauty of the East for her, and he fell in love, and it's quite a beautiful, homey feeling. But then you remember this is one of Jesus' apostles. This is someone who saw the risen Christ, and he's detached from anything in the West because he went east. Unlike Paul and Peter, who went west, Thomas went east. He went to Syria and then into south into Arabia, and then took from Socotra a boat to the Maldives and landed in southern India. And to this day, there are Christians in India who were never part of the Roman Catholic Church, who developed independently and had their own books. Again, the Acts of Thomas is a great book. There's the Gospel of Thomas, which is a bit of a I'm not sure how much of that's legitimate and how much of it is Gnostic invention, but it's not really. It doesn't show up in the East where Thomas was, so I kind of doubt it. There are books in India invented by Indian Christians detached from Rome that Rome didn't even know existed, and so it's difficult for me to believe any supposed claims of Rome inventing Christianity when this branch of Christianity that the West didn't even know about it developed these things independently. And of course, Philip went south through the Essenes, and so his writing has many Essenic influences, and he brought the Essenic texts to Ethiopia. And thus, Ethiopians detached from Rome developed a Philippine, not Philippines, like the Philippine canon of the Ethiopian canon, which they still use today. The Ethiopian canon has books like Enoch, which I read from. Enoch is a pre-Christian book that was integrated into the Ethiopian canon because it was just so chock full of Christian prophecy. Even though it's not a Christian book, it comes from before Christianity. They kept it in their canon because it proves their religion. And you also know that Queen Sheba of Solomon established a Jewish community down there. And to this day, there are Jews in Ethiopia who have not converted to Christianity, who have a much older version of belief from what they call themselves Beta Israel, like Second Israel in the south. And there's arguments between the Jews and Christians there that have been independent of anything in the West or the North, if you will, for Europe. It's quite a fascinating little development. And so a lot of times arguments about the canon in the West are dependent on the Roman tradition, and it kind of ignore the fact that the Roman tradition is not the only tradition, nor is it necessarily the oldest tradition. The concept of a Roman-centric church kind of comes from the 1st or 2nd century and doesn't fully develop until the 4th century, when the Franks and the Romans kind of started working together to reunify Europe after the fall of Rome. That whole branch of Christianity that we are all familiar with is not the only one. It has developed in its own way, in its own traditions in the West. We should really start paying attention to the fact we're not the only Christians. There are broader ones. Fun little story, actually. Martin Luther, because I'm Lutheran, he did not have any proof of being an apostolic church, obviously, because he was kicked out of the Romans, and they tried to make a deal with the Orthodox Church that the Lutherans would become Orthodox if they respected their teachings, but the Orthodox would not agree with this because of the filioque, the creed differences between the East and the West. And so Luther was very desperate to find someone to approve his teachings so he could call himself an apostolic church. And an apostolic church just means that you have a lineage of thought that can be traced to an apostle. And so the apostolic churches are Rome because of Peter and Paul. The St. Thomas Christians get their apostolic tradition from Thomas. I forget who was in Armenia and Georgia, but those Caucasus Mountain churches are also considered apostolic. Ethiopia is the Philip version of the apostolic, and there's also the Coptic Christians, who I think are also founded by Philip or another. I can't remember. Might have been Andrew, actually. But these are like the family of churches which all kind of mutually respect that they are apostolic, but they have differences. That's why they don't call themselves denominations, nor do they call themselves Protestants to each other. They are apostolic. This is a word that's not as familiar in the West, but this is like these are like your ancient divisions, very pre-Protestant. And I encourage everybody to review the Apostolic Churches, why they split off from each other, their disagreements, and the proof that their very existence kind of proves Christianity, because these groups that were completely independent of each other for many centuries, because they were just totally isolated in the deserts of Ethiopia or in the jungles of India, yet they kind of came to the agreement of what canon was. The St. Thomas Christians had the 66 books independently through Syria, is what they got the 66 books through Syria, through the Syriac tradition. The Ethiopians had those 66 books too, in addition to the ones that they added in from their tradition. And the Armenians and Georgians have their 66 books too. So those core 60 book canon is verifiable from these detached church communities that were never part of Rome. They were never under Roman submission, either politically or religiously, but they have their own traditions through the apostles that spread out throughout the world. There is even a lesser known group from it's a K tribe of the Mongolians who supposedly St. Barnabas went to. And this is an area of research which I'm less familiar with, but there is, in fact, a Mongolian Apostolic Church that can trace its teachings back to St. Barnabas, one of the apostles. So they went pretty far. That church is almost extinct at this point, because after communists and imperial Chinese persecution and just persecution, they're all but extinct at this point. But you can still find little bits of like relics and artifacts from when they were more popular. They, I believe, are a breakaway from the Neostrians. You may remember the Neostrians are a more mystic group of Christians, which I won't get into here, but they're their own little group. Neostrians aren't Gnostic necessarily, but they have a lot of similarities between the Gnostics. And again, the Gnostics themselves have their own canon and can trace their heritage back to Jesus from the non-apostolic sources. So there are many Christians, even in Acts when Jesus ascends, it mentions that many saw but few believed. When he, I think it was either resurrection or ascension. It's often traditionally believed that the people who saw the ascension of Christ to heaven but didn't believe it was his body, they became the Gnostics. And so the existence of this early proto-Protestant group of people that disagreed with the Trinitarian beliefs, they were arguing from their witness of Christ. They may not agree with any of the apostolic churches, and they may have developed their own less than verifiable gospels, but they, even in protesting, are verifying that they saw it too. And so I just hope that kind of creates a broad stroke of you to, if you're interested in it, there are many avenues to research all of these different branches of Christianity, which in the West we know less about. But I just want to emphasize the fact that the canon developed multiple times in multiple places independently, not always the same books. And the fact that there are different books kind of gives you the hint that Rome, if you're going to argue that Rome invented Christianity, how were they in India, and why didn't they stop the development of a different canon with different books? Right? It's like they didn't have any authorities going and persecuting Christians over there, and if they did, they failed anyway. But anyway, I'll end the like that little brief overview of the canon there. I think I've mentioned enough specific terms and paths to research for anyone interested.
Well, first of all, just let me thank you for all the information you just dropped. Very, very happy with the quality, density, and variety of information. And I think I'd like to invite you to do a series of 3 podcasts in the future so that we can dig into these topics and other topics more.
Mm-hmm.
But that would be awesome. And as for now, I feel like we've covered so much that I don't want to ask any more questions myself, but I do think we should turn it over, or at least open it up to the audience. So if anybody has a question for Knight or wants to weigh in, go ahead and hit your little wave symbol, and we're going to try and bring you up. Hopefully this works for once. Still haven't quite figured out how to do this. Should be able to bring this dude up. So I've invited you to speak, Amuro. Can you join? There you go. Yeah, feel free to ask your question.
Okay, Sir Anakin. My question to you is, what is a Lutheran? What does a Lutheran believe?
Most Lutherans are categorize themselves as part of the global Lutheran like there's a world Lutheran organization that kind of like gives the definition of he who believes in the small catechism that Luther wrote, kind of just a brief overview of the fundamental beliefs of what Lutherans are. In a simple way, Lutherans are kind of Catholics who disagree with the Pope's authority. We follow pretty much all the same teachings, but disagree. Like for example, we don't pray to saints, but we do read the writings of the saints to kind of inspire us. And we believe we don't have to, we don't have to ask the saints to pray for us. They'll pray for us on their own volition. Lutherans also do try to maintain the ancient structure of the church with bishops and priests and deacons. That's the kind of like the early structure of the church. So we're not really congregationalists is the term. We have a fixed structure. There's elders. The main branches of Lutheranism within America are the LCMS out west and Midwest. I consider myself LCMS because that's pretty much the only one I agree with. The North American Lutheran Congregation is I think it's NALC, is an eastern breakoff of the other third group, the ELCA, the Evangelical Lutheran Church of America. The ELCA has been condemned by the Global Lutheran Organization as having gone heretical. So while it may be the largest American Lutheran church, it is condemned by the global Lutheran community. Which is a kind of interesting thought.
Wow. Okay. I also have another question. What do you think about Christian mysticism?
Yeah, I
I've
remember you
always,
went. Yeah, go finish your question.
yes. The reason why I'm asking is because I do look at myself as a Christo pagan, and the only reason why I do that is because I'm kind of tired of the whole hate between Christian and paganism, and I'm also kind of tired of like a lot of the conformative secular stuff, and then the Christian stuff, and just I kind of get tired of the Bible thumpers trying to infringe on how you should be. So that's kind of why I had to ask that. I'm quoting this question to you. So,
I would say that we have within the Lutheran tradition we have some mystics, but Lutherans typically are distant from mysticism. But we have several branches that kind of embedded themselves in Orthodox tradition. So there's the Byzantine Lutheran Rite, which is a Ukrainian breakoff of Lutheranism that's more interested in mysticism. In the broader Christian tradition, there's I think a great example in Saint Columb, who Saint Columb was one of the main bishops in Ireland and Scotland, and he actually invited the Druids into Christianity, but he was happy for them to maintain their traditional practices as long as they followed Christian doctrine. And so his clan, if you will, of Druidic Christians in Scotland developed a mystic tradition in poetry. You can still read their poems, and oftentimes they're quite prophetic. And he was able to use this, like, kind of, if you're interested, like, it's a branch of Christianity that's lesser known, but it did exist in Scotland, and to some extent still does. But like they were able to like use this practice to, like, protect their island with like weather manipulation. It's kind of crazy, but like they were able to like manipulate the spirits to protect themselves from both pagans and Christian oppressors alike. It may be an area to look into if you're curious. Saint Columb is very interesting. He gave many prophecies, including his own death, and was pretty much on track for them all. Oh, okay, I guess that's the end of that. I think
you can keep answering him. Yeah, he's still there.
Yeah. But yeah. It is an interesting branch of Christianity to investigate. If you're interested in Christian mysticism, the Orthodox Church has a far richer tradition stemming from Saint Ephraim. Saint Ephraim has many writings somewhat contributed to him. They're known as Pseudo-Ephraim. We're not sure if they're actually from him, but they contain many prophecies, visions, practices, stuff like that. Possibly the oldest mention of a rapture of some sort. Very interesting writer. I think Christian mysticism can be summed up with using the authority that Christ has over all beings to extract knowledge or force from spiritual beings or make alliances with them, although the Bible cautions making alliance with them. It instead favors you to take your role as a human being and an authority. A human being have the headship of God and can take authority over spiritual beings and essentially just order them to serve you. Not you don't have to, be a dick about it, but like you have the authority. Don't let them rule over you. That's I think enough for that.
I had quite a few questions.
I
I'm just having a little bit of technical difficulty myself. But I had several questions actually. All of this has been super fascinating and a massive amount of information too. So when it comes to Lutheranism, you were mentioning one branch was condemned. I know this is just a trivial thing based on all the things that you mentioned, but I was just wondering what that was, if you knew what that was.
So the ELCA, they became very broad church, and broad church is a term that means that they allow you to kind of have the title of Lutheran, but they allow you to kind of be highly unique in how you practice it. And this has led to a number of very odd behaviors, including, as I mentioned, something known as Her Church, which is one of the churches of the ELCA out in California, where they've essentially worshiped God as a woman and Jesus Christ as their sister. So it's kind of like very, I guess, transsexual a little bit. Now, I should say, like, most Lutherans are pretty traditional. So by that I mean they're like the LCMS is pretty much hyper traditional. So like not in favor of gay marriage, not in favor of female pastors. The overall global Lutheran community, the Global Lutheran Order, I forget what they call themselves, but like the World Lutheran Organization, is kind of okay at the limit of female pastors, but past that, they're not gonna like confirm. I don't know if they'll necessarily call that okay, but they'll just like they won't condemn it outright. But the World Organization did agree that what the ELCA did with allowing just flatly non-Trinitarian views of God was enough to warrant its removal. The World Lutheran Organization also has an interesting relationship with the Ethiopian Church because, as I mentioned, it was the only church that I forgot. I kind of got distracted, but the Luther did manage to get an Apostolic Church to agree with him. It was the Ethiopian Church. It's one of the reasons why I know a lot about them. And so to this day, the Lutheran Church has an interesting parent-child relationship with the Ethiopian Church, whereby they'll oftentimes ask the Ethiopian patriarchs their spiritual opinion. This at like the global level. Local Lutheran Church, I have no idea what I'm talking about, but the World Lutheran Church has this kind of special relationship with the Ethiopian Church, whereby they will oftentimes confer opinions to them. It's a really interesting fact that this German church has found a relationship with this African church, but I think it's a good testimony to the global manhood that Christianity the global brotherhood that Christianity invites. But the Ethiopian church also agreed that the ELCA has gone very far and it should be considered condemned. And so once the Apostolic Church condemned it, the rest of the Lutherans decided it was condemned as well. Again, it's primarily because they've watered down Christianity and abandoned some fundamental Trinitarian teachings. It does come down to those like creeds, the fundamental things that Christianity has that defines it as Christianity.
Thank you. Shogun, are you able to speak? Because I do have another question, basically one on each of those topics that you're talking about. Okay, perfect. Yes.
Yeah, but go ahead with your question. Sorry, sometimes Stage kicks me out and I got to reset my phone. But go ahead, Kishika.
Well, I was just wondering about the DNA printer, your genetic printing. I wondered number one, if companies are actually doing this right now, like working on some of the stuff that you were talking about,
Yeah,
and
sorry.
if they were made actually and are working.
Yeah, the lab that I work with, which is like a private business lab, is called Vector Builder, which is one of many organizations that print DNA for private interests. There's also Twist Bio. There's also those are two biggest ones. There's quite a number of companies, and they're all kind of developed their own. Snapgene is another one I was thinking. They all kind of developed their own printers. This is a very new technology. Obviously, it's only a few years old, so everyone's kind of investigating their own. I just call it like a genetic printing press. Like these genetic printing presses all have unique ways of doing it. There's something known as solid printing, which is where you take a silicon brick and you bind the first letter of the DNA chain to it, and then you essentially dunk it into a liquid containing each letter, and you just kind of like repeatedly dunk it in a printing press kind of way, and over time the chain will grow to the length you want. There's a liquid version of that where the reaction is done in a liquid medium rather than that solid silicon medium. These are things that are like there's many different ways that are being researched right now. There's also like UV printers, and there's also UV light printers, and there's also a I think the one that uses either sound or lasers. I forget which, but it's very very new and experimental. There are a number of different ways, and personally, I'm investigating them because I would love to build my own DNA printer and not have to pay $400 every time I want to try this stuff. But yes, it is done primarily private organizations with interests. It's shockingly unregulated. I think the most that in terms of regulations are if they suspect you're asking for something toxic to be printed, they won't print it. They'll do like they'll evaluate what you want printed, and if it registers as something that makes a toxic material, they'll say like, yeah, sorry, we're not going to do that. Or obviously, if you do something that might break their machines, like 1,000 base pair long chain is going to get messy and just not, it's going to fail basically. At this point in time, yeah, a little tiny note is there's kind of a limit for how long you can print DNA right now, just because like at a certain length it gets too long to be stable to be in these like open reactions, and so it just kind of self-destructs. So one way they've gotten around that is that they actually loop the DNA chain into a circle instead of a thread, and this is known as a plasmid. And these discs of DNA can be read by a cell. So you have the linear types, which are known as oligios, and the disc types, which are known as plasmids.
Thank you. So, yeah, we have Mr. Waffles. Do you have a question, sir?
Yes. So, are you basically saying, I just want to get this right. So, are you saying these genetic engineering machines, are you saying they're like cloning devices?
No, I mean, when people say clone, we think like you're cloning a full organism.
Mm-hmm.
There's also the idea of cloning a molecule.
Okay.
So there's something known as a PCR reaction, which does clone it. So like when you print these chains off on like for example, the solid printing method I mentioned, where you have a silica block, you
Yeah.
bind you bind the first letter and you build a chain off of it.
Mm-hmm.
Those have to be clipped off and then cloned to be in a large enough volume so that it actually like can be put into a cell. I haven't mentioned how it's put into a cell. It's kind of crazy. One of the most popular ways to put the DNA into a cell is to dry it on metal sand. I forget what it's a heavier metal. I forget what it is. It might be like it may be not titanium. Might be titanium, but I think it's a different metal. And what you do is once it's dried onto the sand, you load it into, no joke, like a gene gun. It's a gun that shoots the powder into the cells, and the metal beads will pierce the cell membrane, and as the cell's healing, it will absorb these chains. And you kind of just like hope that it absorbs a whole chain, because if it absorbs a half chain, the cell just won't be edited. You need the DNA has to have a what's known as a promoter sequence, which is what tells the cell to print it. then the gene of interest, and then a terminator sequence, which tells the printer the cell to stop making it. But yeah, to get enough copies of this sequence so you can shoot it into a cell, you do have to clone it. But you're cloning a molecule, not an organism.
So
And go on.
yeah, so I understand what you're saying. I just have another question. So do you think in the future there will be some sort of device to clone enough molecules to make a being per se, or enough cells or something like that?
Yeah, you could. I would say that exists now. So there are many
For recreational use.
for recreational use. Yeah, it's too expensive right now.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I can imagine in a few decades you'll be able to, like, let's say you want to, let's say you want to get high, and so you take the DNA that is what pot uses to make THC.
Mhm.
And so you just go to your little DNA printer, you print up a THC sequence, you take that DNA and you put it into like a synthetic robotic chamber, which is kind of like almost like something that can do what cells do, but synthetically rather than biologically. And so it'll read your little DNA chain, make a bunch of THC, and you can just smoke it pure, not even needing any plants.
Okay. Yeah. Okay. I think I know what you mean.
Thank you for your questions, Mr. Waffles.
Yes. Thank you.
Does anybody else want to get on the question and answer period before we start wrapping up another excellent podcast? Just go ahead and hit your little wavy symbol if you want. Going once, going twice. Okay. So, Knight, this has been a doozy of a podcast. I really think we should crack it into 3 podcasts in the future, like I mentioned, over time, no rush. But now I want to ask you, is there a takeaway message that you can leave us with, both in the live audience and anybody listening later on YouTube or BitChute? What would you like them to take away?
Yeah, I guess I'll mention something that Magi that I used to know, knew when he was alive. He mentioned, he said that one of the ways to kind of unleash your ability to evaluate stuff is to recognize that there are different methods of thinking. And he would always say that the Westerners, they think very formally, like in terms of form. So that's why we have like different words for aliens or angels or demons. Whereas he would say the Syrians, his people, they thought functionally, which meant that they had fewer words that describe function instead of form. And so for them, alien, angel, demon, it's all kind of like one word of a being that's not human. A malek, which is a kind of spiritual being. A malek can also mean a king. A malek can mean a leader. A malek can mean an angel, a demon, or even an alien. They describe the world in their language through function rather than form. So the same word can cover multiple things that look different, but are all fulfilling the same function in reality. Example again, like they have one word for pen, which describes both pens, pencils, and all of writing utensils. It's just, I think it's like ta or something. I forget what it was, but he always said that if you want to get a bit of a key into how people like Jesus thought, or people from that region think, try to think in terms of functions rather than in forms. And you'll find that the world may be a bit simpler than what you thought, but a lot deeper.
Amazing. Well, guys, I hope you took some of this on board. It's definitely one I'm going to have to listen to again to absorb all the content. But thank you so much for your time and your information, Knight.
Yeah.
Fantastic. Go ahead.
One, I have to always drop that famous. There's a quote that the Magi taught me. And I think it's something I always meditate. I meditate on it at least once a week. But he had a quote that would always remind me. He who calls his fathers fools proves his lineage. And that, I think, is a great parable to end on.
Yeah, point well taken. So thank you very much, my friend. God bless. Welcome to Knights of the Round Table. Well deserved. And thank you, everybody, for attending the live recording. Please make sure you have joined the Roundtable Discord server. We'll be recording, as always, every day at 8 p.m. Central. Great podcast coming up from the likes of Mr. Kit, Mr. Batman, Inspirational Madness, Ralph, and many more. So keep your eyes on the announcements channel where we always tell you what's coming up so you won't miss it. And make sure you've joined the Roundtable Podcast YouTube channel, the Roundtable Live YouTube channel administered by Ainsof. Oh, and make sure you participate in the prayer vigil for Ainsof. He's experiencing life-threatening health challenges right now. Whatever your faith perspective, please say a prayer for Brother Ainsof and send him some kind words in his DMs. It will mean a lot right now, I promise you that. And also, he's going to be coming on tomorrow at 8 to discuss what it's like being so close to that final day that we must all face. So I don't think you guys are going to want to miss that podcast at all. That being said, thanks, everybody. Join the podcast on RT Podcast. And let's jump up now to the Roundtable Chat or Pub if you want a video chat. And we'll see you back here tomorrow. Thanks, everybody. Thanks, Rafi, for recording and uploading. God bless.